Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Fearless Road podcast. I am your host, Michael DeVue, and this week we are interviewing Bob DePasquale, whose purpose is not just a revelation, but a practice, and he puts the work in every single day. Bob and I also had the opportunity to re-record this several times as we were having technical issues getting this off the ground, but I thought that it was important to share this episode with you during this time of generosity during the holiday season. With his book, Personal Finance in a Public World, Bob uses his experience with thousands of families to share with you how to make wise money and technology decisions, and of course, learn how to be generous. I think it's timely, I think it's important, and hopefully it matters to you. Hey, by the way, if you like what you hear, if you love the show, would you mind liking and subscribing, maybe sharing it with a few of the people that you care about this holiday season? I think that'd be great. Oh, and get that gift, for everybody, the book. Personal Finance in a Public World. Everybody loves a finance book for the holidays, right? That's the gift that keeps on giving. So, literally. So, why do I look like? I look like Mr. Rogers. Anyway, happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy this episode from the Fearless Road podcast. Again, I'm your host, Michael DeVue. Like and subscribe. And, of course, I'll put all the links I can down below. Much love to you, and stay fearless. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Fearless Road podcast. This week in the house with me today is my special guest, Bob DePasquale. After a harrowing incident that nearly cost him his life and the amazing generosity of several people to save him, Bob DePasquale has embarked on a journey to find out how generosity can impact our businesses, our organizations, and of course, our lives. Now, he spent 15 years learning how to apply the giving and gifting principles in his own business. And now it's his mission to help others do the same by showing leaders of organizations that having a generous culture and a mindset will attract better employees and better customers. He is also known as the Generosity Guy, the founder of the Initiate Impact financial investment and management firm, as well as his book that is out, Personal Finance. Everybody, please welcome Bob DePasquale.
Michael,
Not
man.
the applause. I wish I could put like a laugh track or an applause track in there, because I feel like we're just sort of like, where's the
I hear
where's
you,
the noise? But we're going to bring the noise on our own. We're going to bring the excitement and the energy here today on our own. Finance and fear, the two big F's. I mean, there's a lot that goes on there, I would imagine. So tell me a little bit about you and your background. Get us caught up for our audiences. I already know Bob. I'm familiar with him and his work, so that's unfair. But to the rest of our audience members and people that are listening out there, give us a little background story on you, how you got to where you are today, and why generosity.
Absolutely, Michael. Pleasure to be on the show here today. The Fearless Road. Fear is one of those F's that I just despise. I do not like being fearful. And so it's great to come on the show today and talk a little bit about the things in my life that combat fear, if you will, and generosity is at the top of the list. You talk about my story and what's going on in my life and catching people up. Man, it has been a hectic couple months, if I'm being quite honest. But
yes, it has. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't know, both Bob and I have been dealing with some technical issues on both sides of the fence, as well as issues at home with construction and noise and all these interference elements that get in the way of us producing this particular episode. So we have tried multiple times, and here we are to give this to you. So hopefully today we nail it. And if we don't, forgive us. We'll get there.
we're going to get it done today, ladies and gentlemen.
That's
for
right.
Sure.
We are.
And so, somewhat, Michael, but I don't want to be that guy who makes it seem like, everything I've done in life is some massive obstacle. But to be honest with you, that the past couple of months have kind of been a microcosm of my life. There's been a lot of things that have been thrown at me kind of unexpectedly. But I, over the years, I've learned to appreciate those challenges, and they've challenged me to overcome fear. And so I'm traveling that road as we go. I don't think you ever get over it. I think you learn how to understand it and learn how your body and mind best handles it. So yeah, I would be more than happy to talk to you a little bit about my story. Essentially, I'm a New Yorker by birth, but a Floridian by just about everything else in life. And I lived here in South Florida.
Typical snowbird.
Exactly. I was a snowbird when I was 3 years old. My parents chased my grandparents down here and decided to just live, decided to move. So most of my family on both sides is up there in New York. And my wife's family is actually from Michigan. And man, is it cold up there. So we just love sitting down here in our beautiful paradise in South Florida.
Do you like sending them those postcards during the holidays?
Yes, that's what we do. That's what we do. Our little Christmas card every year is our holiday card is us doing something warm. So people complain. Ironically, though, sometimes we usually do go up north to visit one of the family, one of the sets of families. So I do get my taste of the cold weather, but I'm not
enough to get back home.
Yeah. So Floridian most of my life, and you mentioned about 15 years I spent in the financial industry. I actually was recruited out of broadcasting. I'll tell you a little bit more about my education and my story in a moment, but I have a master's degree in broadcast journalism, and I didn't really use it too much for many years in my financial career, but I'm learning how to get back into it and use it more. And it's such a pleasure of mine now to speak with organizations, whether on a recorded chat like this or in person. I mean, I love addressing people, and having some training in that field has been a powerful force of what I do. And so you mentioned about generosity, and I had this thought while you were talking a moment ago that I am so blessed and lucky to be in a career now that really lends itself to learning about the giving and generosity of other people. Like I just have to rely on others to put me where I'm at today, to put me in the professional situations that I've had today. And so I don't know if I was always that person. When I was younger, I thought I was invincible, and this kind of leads well into my story. But I don't know how many people out there were, 18 years old and they thought they were invincible and could take on the world and nothing could take them down. Michael, I don't know if you felt that, but I certainly
the youth,
did.
Bliss of youth, man. I mean, ignorance is amazing when you're young and you just don't know.
Yeah, I thought, listen, I wouldn't go as far as arrogant. Maybe you can talk to some of the people that I grew up with, but I wouldn't call myself arrogant, but I was a pretty confident person. I thought, that even if mistakes would come in my way, I was so young and I had opportunities, and but it took some really challenging times in life to realize that you can't go it alone. You can't go through things and build your professional career or even your life or your family by yourself. And so that's been really, really powerful for us. So speaking of New York and Florida, I graduated from high school and I thought I was going to go back to New York for college. And I had 3 reasons to go back to school. One of them was because I had an opportunity to play football. The other one was, or one of the other ones was because my family was from New York and I really didn't know my cousins and my aunts and uncles that well. I was like, what a cool opportunity. I'll be able to go to school and I'll be able to spend some more time with them. I always liked spending time with them when we did, but I didn't really know them very well. And then finally, I suppose education was the reason why I went up there. Now, my parents probably wished it was higher on the list, but I had a chance to go to school up there too. And so little did I know that it was going to be so cold, but that's another story. And I actually spent those 4 years of my life, college in New York. But the critical part of the story, and I, there's the details, some of them, Michael, and I had an opportunity to play ball, like I mentioned, and a college training camp is a little bit different. If you've ever played college ball or even if you play high school ball, you know what a training camp is, but it's a little bit different in college, a little bit more intense. It's longer. The days are super, super long as well. And early on I was a couple days into my freshman season of playing football, trying to prove myself to my coaches and my new teammates. And I had what I thought was a pulled groin muscle. And so lesson number 1, you think you're invincible. The first thing I realized is that a pulled groin muscle is a horrible injury. I mean, forget football field.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever have you ever pulled a muscle down there?
Oh, yeah. I tore my gracilis completely off. I dislocated my gracilis, and it wound up dislocating from my groin down to my knee. And then I had to have it in rehab because I didn't want to do surgery. They had to manually roll it back up into my groin to get it to reattach on its own. So there was this really big African-American gentleman who was the rehab coach or whatever that worked with me. And I would sit,
legs open, akimbo as it may be. And he, he would apply icicles, big, large popsicles with ice and stuff up and down it to sort of get it cold and numb. And then he would use his thumbs and he would slowly push it and roll it back up. I mean, all the way up into the groin, very, 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 very close to my,
invasive.
Yeah. And the pain management of that alone was a practice in order to, because they didn't put you on anything. You didn't take anything with pain. You just had to breathe through it. So yeah, it's no joke. No joke.
So and so that type of injury is probably what they thought I had. And I was doing these rehab exercises to try to rehab this groin muscle. I mean, anyone out there, and now I know that I mean, you can't sit, walk, stand, rotate your torso. I mean, it's a really debilitating injury for your groin and the muscles down there to be hurt. And so my college level, like a graduate level rehab exercise was to sit on this 3-wheeled stool and shimmy across the training room.
Yes. Like it's almost like doing crab walk, but you had to do the hips.
Yeah.
You had to work the I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know that move.
Like I guess it was supposed to strengthen the muscles down there or something. I don't know. All I know is that I look ridiculous dodging people in this crazy training room on any given morning. And it was just embarrassing, to be honest with you. And one day, the peak of my embarrassment was our little head trainer. And I say little because, I mean, legitimately, he's a small guy. And he would have to stand on this box in the middle of the training room to try to get everyone's attention. And it just seemed like that one moment when he was calling me out, I think it was just me because it was so embarrassing, but it seemed like it suddenly got dead silent. And everyone in the room could hear him scream across the room to me. And they called me Bobby at the time. And he was like, "Bobby, quit being a weakling. You got to get back out on the field." And I'm like,
dang,
man, like I'm thinking to myself, weakling, like you're 5'6", 120 pounds soaking wet. I'm running around. I'm trying to run away from 300 pounders trying to tackle me. I'm no weakling. I have a serious injury here, bro.
Yeah.
And I ended up having a more serious conversation with him a little bit later that day. And he actually sent me to a doctor because, I mean, a week plus went by and it just wasn't getting any better. So he's like, "All right, go to the doctor, get some tests." And, technically I'm an adult at that time, man. Like it wasn't like I had my parents around or I had a drive. I'm driving all over Long Island, New York, going to these different tests. And I had ultrasounds, CAT scans, sonograms, MRIs. I mean, you name it, every test in the book to try to figure out what was going on with my groin. Come to find out it wasn't a gracilis injury. And I'll never forget this. These appointments were so long. And if you've gone to the doctor before, especially when you go to a new doctor, you sit there and you fill out all this paperwork and medical information and all this stuff that, I mean, I can't even answer those questions now in my life. Forget when I was 18.
Oh, these weren't digital days. This was the clipboard they hand you with like a packet of paper this thick that you have to handwrite everything in repeatedly at every single doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. And penmanship is not one of my skills. Put it that way.
I'm right there with you. It's chicken scratch all the way. Chicken scratch.
Yeah. I'm surprised they even let me in the appointments. They probably thought I was writing an error. But so I go to all these appointments and I'm kind of getting in a rhythm. Like I think I almost memorized my parents' member number on whatever their insurance policy was. And I get to the last appointment. I knew that we weren't really sure what was going on, but this was the last scheduled appointment. And this was the day that my parents had scheduled months ago to come up for my first ever college football game. Now, we knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point, considering I couldn't run or let alone walk. And so a couple of days later was the game, but this was a Thursday morning. I expected to be in this appointment for an hour, half the day, like typically I was. And so I walk in the doctor's office and, the doctor was quiet. It's early in the morning. There's not much going on. And I walk in the room. And I mean, it's like they were waiting for me to be there. Like it was like I was the guest of honor. I walk in the door and immediately they called me up to the desk and like, "Hey, Robert, great to see you. And come right in." I mean, they took me right into the office. I didn't even have a chance to sit down, I don't think. They take me into the room there. I sit down. Within 30 seconds, the doctor comes in. So it's now, I've been in this office for a total of 5 minutes, and things are moving really fast. The doctor sits down. He looks me in the eye. We're sitting across from a desk from each other, and he goes, "Bobby, you have cancer." And
Wait, how old were you?
18.
Well, they couldn't have been looking for that. No wonder. I mean, it must have taken them so long to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, they weren't expecting that, and the crazy thing is I expected to get a little bit, I mean, I love podcasting. I love talking like this. I expected to have a little bit of conversation with the doctor.
Buy me a cocktail first before you drop the bomb.
Yeah, where's the drink? So
were your parents with you? Were they in the room?
So the crazy thing is my parents were flying up to see my game at that moment. Like, I was in the appointment myself, and they were on a plane.
Oh my God.
So the doctor looks at me and goes, "I know you're probably in shock. But we're going to hook you up with an oncologist. You're free to go." And that was it.
That's it?
That's what he said. And I'm thinking,
here's some pamphlets. Like, here's a couple pieces of paper that, because they always hand you pamphlets.
Yeah.
Did you get a sucker or anything?
No lollipops.
No lollipop?
No Jolly Ranchers. Nothing.
Your life is
pamphlets.
fucked and good luck.
Yeah.
But
no literature. I guess they thought I was in college and I probably didn't want to read anymore. But so I left the office.
And I bet you were stunned.
Yeah, I left in shock, and it was kind of crazy. But the timing of this next part of the story is incredible. So I walk out of the office, and then once again, an office that I'm not familiar with. I don't know where I am, and I'm just
limp out of the office. You limping.
Yeah, I'm disoriented to begin with because I don't know where I'm at. And I'm in shock because I have cancer. I don't even know what. I guess you could assume, but I didn't really. I didn't even.
But did he tell you what type of cancer? Or did he just say you have cancer?
Just said you have cancer.
What?
And
oh my
God!
God!
I think maybe he was trying to not confuse, trying to make it as easy as possible, simple. Maybe not easy, but simple for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
simplify it.
My brain is going 100 miles an hour. And I walk out of the building.
But you're like, but what about my groin?
Yeah. So
did you associate those two things, or were you just still spinning?
No, I just still spinning. Honestly, Michael, knowing me at the time, I thought if I had an opportunity to ask him a question, I probably would have asked him when I could play again. If I'm being honest.
Right.
That's the mindset of an 18-year-old. Somewhat crazy person, but also determined. Most of my life up until 18 was, pushing through. And, I was raised in a very loving home, but I was an only child. And they said, you got to fend for yourself. You got to get stuff done. If you want things to get done in the world, my parents always used to tell me to fight for something that I cared about. Right. And so I was a pretty resilient person. So that was my thought, to be honest with you, if I even had one, really.
And that there was no one else to lean on, that you didn't have brothers and sisters. You didn't have we're here for you. But buddy, when you go out into the world, it's you.
And that was my mindset. 100%. That's a great way to articulate. I mean, I really didn't have anyone that I was used to leaning on. So I suppose that was good for me. I don't want to say people shouldn't have anyone to lean on. That's certainly not the case, but at least maybe for me at that moment, it was good for me to kind of have the mindset to just power through.
Well, developing self-reliance is a skill set and the character building, adventure. It's some of us did it because we were simply stubborn, just stubborn. It was like, fuck the world kind of an attitude. I'm going to do this regardless. Right. But those of us who grew up without that support system, or at least with the knowledge that we really didn't have one, developed that self-reliance much quicker and much sooner, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, the mind was just racing. And the moment I walked out of that building, really not knowing what I was even going to do, I don't even know if I knew where my car was. But the moment I walked out of the building, the phone rang. We did have cell phones at this point, and it was my mom. And she was surprised that I answered the phone because she expected me to be in this doctor's appointment again for, a couple hours.
At least an hour or so, yeah.
Yeah, as all the other ones I got. And so I answered the phone, and she's like, "Hey, honey, I expected you to be in the appointment. Thanks for answering, but just want to let you know that we landed. We're in the car. We're on our way to your uncle's house. We'll meet you there. How'd the appointment go?" And I said, "Mom, so about that." And, obviously I had to tell her what the doctor said. And the only thing that I could I mean, she was dead silent, but screaming all at the same time, like it was such an emotional moment through the phone. And the only thing I could hear was my dad, because he was in the car with her on the other side. And he was yelling, and maybe not yelling, but to me, it sounded like yelling, but he's Susan, which is my mom's name. He's like, what's going on? Like, even he knew something was wrong by my mom's reaction, to me.
Yeah.
And so we met back at my uncle's house shortly after that. And, I had an only child, somewhat of a mama's boy. I mean, I had never been away from home for 6 weeks like that, or 5 or 6 weeks, whatever it was. And so, I mean, I gave my parents a big hug, and we kind of looked at each other, still in shock, and shed some tears, said a few prayers, and we're like, what do we do now? I mean, the 18-year-old invincible kid suddenly has a life-threatening illness. It was really, really challenging.
Well, and especially being sent home without any paperwork or any kind of, informative packet of any kind. Like, your parents must have been terrified. They didn't know what kind of cancer. They didn't know where it was. They didn't know, other than getting a hold of that doctor again, which, they would have to wait for. They must have been just frightened.
Oh, yeah. They were scared. And, my parents will talk about it now. And really, the stories that they tell are really, really interesting, because it really challenged their relationship, because they had never been so concerned about something before. And when you don't know, especially early on, like you said, it was, there was a lot of talk about fear. It
could have been just a death sentence. That's the first thing you think of is it a death sentence for my child,
Yeah.
And to watch your parents face that. While you were already handling it, but just to see the terrified looks on their faces when they don't have the answers, it's got to be very scary.
And you said it exactly. When they don't have the answers. So one thing, it would be hard, but if they knew they had to do something like really challenging, that they would have cut off their arm to save me, and that would have been hard. But at least they know what to do. You're right; they don't even know what to do. They're somewhat helpless at this point. So that was a tough time.
Wow. That's so. So you've made it home. I assume you didn't go to the game that day.
So that was Thursday. The game was a couple days later, and so we knew obviously I wasn't playing, and and when it was an away game, and so when you're not playing in the game, you don't travel with the team. So I was still at my uncle's there. Now we ended up talking to the oncologist, I think probably the next day, who happened to be, by the way, this is part of the whole collaborative generosity story, but I don't normally mention this in the story just because it's another detail, but it's also interesting to point out that one of my cousin's friends, and she was in like first or second grade at the time, her dad ended up being my oncologist. And so the way we got connected with him, and we were able to talk to him right away. So that provided a lot of relief for my parents, but he told me to continue to taking classes. So I didn't go back to Florida. I stayed in New York. And so it's that Saturday, the day of the first game. And my uncle's best friend comes over his house, and his name was Tim. And we didn't know this guy because, we lived in Florida. And so he walks into the house and he says hi to my aunt and uncle. And they didn't even really have a chance to introduce him to parents. He just knew who they were. It's like he knew who they were, right? He walks right over to my parents and he pulls his keys out of his pocket. And it seemed like he was shoving them in their face, but he was just handing it to them. And he said, "Bob and Susan, here's my keys. Take my car. You can have it for as long as you need. I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now." Oh. And I was thinking to myself, wow, that's the most generous thing that someone's ever done for me and my family. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, who is this guy?
Yeah. That's an amazing, like to recognize that you guys were there, I'm assuming without transportation because they'd flown up. And he was like, you know what, here you go. Let me just at least provide this for now.
Yeah. And I like to talk about radical generosity. And to me, that's something that, that you do that someone else probably wouldn't. And
yes, the unexpected kindness.
Who's going to give you their car? That was just nuts. And the crazy thing too was he didn't even know us, and he was there for like 15 minutes, and he just left. He did that. We talked for like a minute. He said goodbye to my aunt and uncle, and he was gone.
Wow.
And we were like, So
But
he
so
came
many
over
of
just
these
to give us the car.
incidences were happening so fast for you, like within the span of a few days. The instant of being told, the instant of your parents arriving, the instant of him being generous, and then
No,
just switch.
Yep.
You know,
It all
were
moved
you
very
still
fast.
spinning at this point? Like, what were you? Was your head still spinning? You hadn't made sense of it or absorbed it, or where were you? And mentally, I mean,
Michael, I have trouble making sense of a lot of things in life. And at 18, at 18, at 18, I mean, I was not prepared to make sense of anything. I mean, listen, I don't want to be too self-deprecating. I wasn't the dumbest kid, but I mean, at that point in my life, it was, sports and, hanging out with my friend. I mean, that was what I was into. So like, I wasn't really thinking too deeply about anything. I think it was more like, okay, this is just kind of what you do, and
wow.
And I did, however, what Tim did for us did really stick out to me, though. That I gathered, like that I picked up on something about that. And, I don't know if that was, I don't think, to be honest with you, Michael, that was just natural, right? Like, I don't think I had this special desire at that point in my life to identify generosity. It's a lot different now. And it's what I do, a lot of what I do for a living. But I think there's just something special about that moment hit me. And I'll never forget it. I think about it all the time. And that was it. And Tim was gone. And so continuing the story, a few days later, I went to my second ever college class on Tuesday morning. And, I don't want to say a normal day. I mean, obviously at this point, things were not normal in life. But I came out of my second ever college class and I go to the cafeteria to grab something to eat. I had a breakfast burrito and I'm sitting there by myself watching the news. Now, I don't know the news station. I'm 18 years old. I don't even watch the news, but it's what's on TV. And it had one of those like old school tube televisions that was probably 8 inches wide. And it's hanging from a bracket on the ceiling, between the ceiling and the wall in the cafeteria there. And I'm watching the thing, and all of a sudden they flip to this emergency and they show a plane crashed into one of the towers in New York City, not too far from where I went to school.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh man, that's, what a horrible accident. It's terrible. So I actually called my dad. I said, hey, Dad, he was back at my uncle's and he's like, hey, are you watching the news? And he's like, yeah, I'm watching the news. You see this plane? And I'm like, yeah, that's terrible. And it was riveting. But in less than, maybe a minute later or so, bam, another plane hits the tower right next to the first one. And we didn't realize it at the moment, but it turns out that the September 11th terrorist attacks were happening right then. Yeah.
Most of us didn't know it. The first time when I saw the first plane, I thought it was a stunt. I thought it was a part of my brain was like, this isn't real. What is this? Is this some kind of a joke? Is this some kind of a manufactured thing? It didn't add up for me. And I couldn't even envision or fathom what it would take to get a plane to crash into a building in New York, let alone be cleared for that airspace. Like all the different things that my head was trying to add up that you would have to be able to do. And I wasn't thinking terrorist. I was thinking, well, who would do that? Nobody would do that. Like, this is America. And that's, I think that's that whole sense of safety that this assuming of safety that we had at the time came crashing down around us at that same time.
Mm-hmm. I just didn't know what to think. I was like, okay, that's kind of crazy. And my dad said, you better get in the car and get back to your uncle's house. That's not an accident. So he knew something.
Were you in the car that gentleman gave you?
Yeah.
Oh,
you better get back in his car and get back to your uncle's. So I hopped in the car. I mean, I sprinted out of that place as fast as I could with my groin injury. that was no longer a groin injury. And I didn't finish what I was eating. That breakfast burrito is probably still sitting there. And I hop in the car, and it took me 9 hours to drive what was typically a 15-minute drive.
Because everybody was on the roads trying to get out of New York.
Yep. I'm in New York. I'm driving. I can see burning towers in the distance. I mentioned my master's degree in broadcast journalism earlier. I worked at AM radio. I loved working in it, but I didn't I would never listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again, ever in my life. But it was riveting. I mean, I listened to all the coverage.
Oh, yeah.
No one knew what was going on. And I actually barely got off the highway. Thank God I was able to get off the highway, and I ran out of gas just off the highway in my uncle's neighborhood. And I remember calling my parents. Somehow, back then your cell phone battery, you weren't on it like the whole time, so it lasted the day, So I still had cell phone battery left. I called my parents and said, "Hey, I'm around the block. Can you come help me push the car into the driveway?" So we pushed the car in the driveway, and I get out of the car, and it was a very similar moment to when I got out of the car the day I was diagnosed. And I looked at my parents, and we kind of like were staring at each other, like, "Wow, I was invincible Bobby, 5 days ago. Then suddenly I felt like my life might be coming to an end. Now we think the world might be coming to an end." I mean, it was unbelievably fearful, just confusing. You just didn't know what was going on. And so my aunt was hysterical. I mean, she was even more hysterical than we were. And because my uncle was on business the night before, and he was supposed to fly home that morning. Now he was in Denver. Now we didn't know at the time that the planes didn't come from there. So we were concerned that he was on one of those planes because he was flying back to New York.
Yeah.
So maybe 8:00 or so, he calls and he's like, "Hey guys, I'm really sorry. I'm sure you've been panicking. I'm fine. I'm alive. My plane never took off. I'm going to be okay. I'll try to catch a flight tomorrow. Everything's fine." And then we talked for a couple of minutes, whatever. We were going to hang up, and he ended up saying, "Before I let you go, I got to tell you that, my friend Tim, who you all met just a few days back, he was in the towers this morning and he died."
Oh my God.
And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, that guy, like I said, was just the guy who came over and gave us his car, for as long as we needed.
That's Tim. Tim's the guy that came by and dropped off his car?
Yeah, my uncle's best friend at the time. And
oh my gosh. And now he's gone.
So it turns out that Tim worked for an investment firm called Cannerford Sherald, which kind of brings my career in the financial space full circle.
Wow.
And
talk about planting that seed.
Yeah, right. And so Cannerford Sherald, you can go. I would encourage anyone out there to, especially if you want to learn more about some of the like behind the scenes, well, not behind the scenes, but some of the human interest stories of 9/11. Cannerford Sherald is an investment firm, and their main offices were there in the tower, one of the towers, and everyone from their firm except their leader, his name is Howard Lutnick. So if you YouTube the Howard Lutnick press conference after 9/11, you'll see one of the most emotional press conferences from, I mean, I wouldn't call him a regular guy because he was the leader of a massive investment firm, but I mean, he's still a regular guy. And he was uncharacteristically late that morning, would never not be in the office, but was taking his grandkid or kid. So I think it was his son to school, and just for whatever reason that day, because his wife had something going on and she couldn't take him. So he was one of the people who you've seen some of the videos of people running, like they're on the street near the tower when it starts collapsing. And he's one of the people like running away from the tower, and he ended up surviving. And his press conference, he's like, "I lost everyone." Like he's in such shock and so emotional that he just lost everyone. And Tim was one of those people. And it turns out that Cannerford Sherald and Tim himself were known for being very, very generous people, a generous organization. They would donate office space for free, completely free, to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis, which is a disease my cousin has. And so the foundation had prime office space in a tower in the World Trade Center in New York City because Cannerford Sherald just gave them the office space. And luckily, no one, the only person that would typically be in the office that early for the foundation was Tammy, and she got stuck in the subway below the tower that day, and she survived. And she's got some incredible stories of her own of how she made it out herself. But I tell you that because I think about this a lot, Michael. So Tammy, God bless, she was spared, and she's still alive to this day and can tell stories. But for some reason, Tim, it wasn't meant to be that Tim would survive that day. And Tim and all the people at Cannerford Sherald were known for being extremely generous. And apparently Tim would say something to the effect of, "You never know when your last chance to be generous will be." And if you've listened to media or you're if you're alive in the world today, you've heard of the acronyms FOMO and YOLO, fear of missing out, or you only live once, and, just go for it and do the daredevilish things. And believe me, I'm totally cool with people doing things to, to quench their
Carpe
thirst
diem.
for adventure.
Yes.
But Tim would say, you never know when your last chance to be generous for someone else is. And it turns out that our family was his last chance to be generous, and we're super thankful that he capitalized.
Wow. I mean, that's a legacy he left you. How the immense sense of responsibility you must have felt to own up to and be responsible for that last gift of generosity and learning how to pay it forward. Do you think that's part of the reason why it planted a seed for you for generosity? Is that where this all began, and then you felt obligated, or at least, I don't want to use the word obligated. That feels like that's uncharacteristic, unfair, but do you feel like you just felt a sense of major responsibility to his legacy of giving and generosity to do something with that?
Absolutely. And I think the seed is a great way to put it, because it wasn't like, boom, I'm going to be the most generous person I could be, and I want to go talk with organizations about building generous cultures. It didn't happen like that.
Well, no, you still had to grow up and learn. You still had to develop a life and become an adult and establish something with the foundation. But it was there. The germination of the idea and the impact of the giving and that generosity in that moment. It must have been huge. I assume your family thinks about his family to this day.
So Tim had 3 kids. They were all very, very young. I think one of them was an infant at the time.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, it was a terribly sad situation for a lot of families. So I don't want to make it seem like there weren't thousands upon thousands of people who lost their lives. But I'll never forget meeting Tim's wife, because she wasn't there that day that she came over. And, we're still friendly with her to this day. And, I understood. At 18, I was old enough to understand what she was going through, having lost her husband with 3 young kids and, a life to live. And so I think about that time in my life, that whole period of time from when I started going to some of those tests all the way up to the day of 9/11, actually. So you're talking about a few week period of my life there, specifically the 5 days between the diagnosis and 9/11. But you talk about a seed, and I'm glad you said it that way, because this is not an exaggeration whatsoever. I think about that period of my life every single day. And and until I become incoherent, I will think about it every day for the rest of my life. And now some days it's some happy memories. Some days it's a little more somber. Like every year on actual 9/11 is usually a kind of a rough day for me. But that seed is continuing to grow. I mean, it's a tree now. I mean, I'll be honest, but it's still growing. I'm still pruning and still learning. And so Tim absolutely planted it, but it's certainly a journey.
Well, these are one of those quintessential moments where if you stare into the abyss long enough, you can get lost in the timing that had to occur for these things to come together at this particular set of moments, for all of these things to happen in your life. It's almost unfathomable, or I don't even know if the word. I can't even remember.
I think you got it. Unfathomable.
How it is that these lines of people's lives, these moments that were just off by seconds, had to line up and occur just in this way for these set of events to occur, and especially to impact you the way that they did. I mean, that's not lost on me. That I think a lot of us don't have those kind of junctures and crossroads in our lives to reflect on. They may be smaller and less prolific and massive in terms of their impact. But for you to be standing at the crossroads of so many lives and be a survivor, but then a person who takes that in step with your journey and begins to make something out of it. I mean, that's incredible. It's no wonder that you're not, that you haven't are you writing about this? Are you adding that? I mean, I know you mentioned a couple of things in the, your finance book and stuff, but are you planning on writing a little bit more of like a autobiographical
So-
memoir or story
So
to
you,
capture this?
yeah, so you're putting the pressure on me, but the short answer is yes. And you mentioned
Yeah.
the word obligation earlier. I absolutely feel a sense of obligation to share my story because I think I've learned over the years. I probably when it first happened, and even for a few years after that, I wouldn't have thought it could be impactful, but I understand that it is now because I've had many people tell me. And so, yes, I do plan on writing. I have written about it in certain occasions in my blog, but and some social posts. I'm pretty active on social media, but I have not put it all into a book. And so that's going to take some time because, to be honest with you, Michael, I feel like I wouldn't be able to finish the book right now. And so maybe
You're
not
probably
to start it, but
yes. Well, I have a couple of friends who've had some similar set of circumstances in their lives who feel like the sharing of that story in any way, shape, or form that benefits them financially, they feel bad about. Like they don't want to benefit from it, as a result. And so I think there's this sort of they harbor this sort of like resistance to sharing it in that way because it is inevitable. I think that if you share it in a book form or what have you, that you could benefit from it financially. And I think a lot of people feel reticent, to allow such a thing to happen, but I think the story is so impactful. And so it's so pivotal too, because in your journey to become the generosity guy, this is how lives begin. This is how journeys begin for us when we really become and step into fully 100% the authentic version of our own selves, right? Which is not on a dime. It is not immediate. It is a journey we finally get to when we realize all the wonderful and impactful and major tragic things that happen in our lives have set us on this course. And we now must pay attention because when we weren't paying attention, shit was falling apart. Shit wasn't working. Things weren't operating well, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden we start paying attention to all those little signs and all those little signals, all those little things that were course correcting you. And you start to go with that flow. You step into 100% who you're supposed to be. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in studio, Fearless Road podcast with Bob DePasquale, who just shared an incredible origin story with his fear. I think where it began for him with the diagnosis of cancer in New York at the time when 911 went down, and the generous gift of a gentleman, Tim, who offered his car at a life-changing moment, who was also lost in 9/11. We're talking about moments that change us, moments that impact us, and moments that have created for Bob a bigger and more impactful journey. We'll be right back. Okay, so, we got literally down the road with you on so many different paths here to get to you to where you are. I don't want to get too far afield from the impact of that story, but I also kind of want to, I need to jump into some of these questions. This impact of generosity, this moment of this gift that set you on a course. We sit today in a society that is not how I would not describe our society culture today as generous. I mean, and let me sort of, I think it's a double-edged sword, or it's a two-sided coin, if you will. We are at a precipice of fear and scarcity, of dynamic political divergence, and a torn and non-unified community, where I feel a little fearful about generosity. How do you describe generosity in today's society, in today's culture? Where do you see it for us right now?
Well, that's an interesting question about how I describe it in today's culture, because it is certainly different than even the way I experienced it when I was growing up, and certainly much, much different than it was years and years ago. And it's been around since the beginning of time. I mean, there's stories from some of the oldest writings and scriptures in the world that talk about generosity. And so,
yes,
it's been around, but yeah, it is certainly different in today's world. And I think there's two things that stick out to me the most. Number one is, and you kind of alluded to it, I think generosity has suddenly become the antithesis of self-support and success. and achievement. And that one pains me. That point pains me because, I see generosity as a collaborative experience. And I heard a message or a thought from a tour guide that I had on a trip this summer. And we could talk more about that trip too. I was actually in Israel, considering all that's going on right now. So it relates to what we're talking about.
Yes.
But our tour guide was a super tremendously nice gentleman, and he talked about the difference between giving and sharing. And it was really interesting to me the way he articulated it, because he essentially proved to me that it doesn't matter what culture in the world that you're in, that we were built and made to share with each other, and we don't have to take each other down to be successful. When you talk about scarcity and that, the difference between scarcity and the abundance mindset, I think generosity certainly falls, or it should fall, on the abundance side. But for some reason, we've got this idea or thought that generosity is something that is it is selfless, but I don't think it's the opposite of selfish. And so it's actually a good thing. And it's proven. I mean, I have data, and I talk about this all the time with people in organizations. The best organizations are the most generous and most giving. And so that's the first point. And the other thing related to generosity is this one also troubles me a bit too. And this is kind of what helped me make a transition from working for a large financial organization to opening my own firm, because people were asking me about this, and their big concern was that they're not capable of executing on the generosity that they desire. And now, whether that's giving financially, which obviously in my industry, that's a big part of what we do, but also giving of their time, their intellectual property, other resources that they have, and they just felt incapable. And I just don't
sharing of themselves, I think.
Yeah, they think they're incapable. And because and it's related to fear. I absolutely believe it's related to fear. I talk about, being on the Fearless Road podcast. People think that giving is a fearful road. And if I'm being honest, I've seen some people transform their lives, whether it's financially or just their lives in general, by going down the generosity road.
Yes. And I think that, going back to what you said about, there's a couple of human condition things that we're born with that I believe that is natural for us. One is we are built to dream as humans, as small creators in this world. We are built to learn. And I think, as you said it, we're built to share, to take that learning and to take that dreaming and then share it with the world. And I think what's happening right now is we have turned a corner in a lot of our cultures and societies where learning, dreaming, and sharing have been darkened, shaded, shunted, shamed, pushed down, hidden. Like, I feel like those very natural parts of who we are being left aside or being cast aside and not focused on. And I think that's a very dangerous path for us to be on. I think we need to really think about opening our hearts. I don't think we would be in the conditions and situations we are, Israel or otherwise, if we were bigger dreamers, better learners, and bigger sharers of all of it,
I agree. And the thing that comes to mind, when you mention those things, giving, sharing, learning, it all comes back to collaboration for me, and working together. Since the beginning of time, humans have to rely on each other to survive. And so all of those things, I think they happen to some degree in the world, but it's like an over specialization, or they don't work together as much as they should. We don't.
Well, it's not a practice. You know what I'm saying? We're not practicing it. Like, the businesses are practicing the art of making money. Schools are practicing teaching, but there's not the art of learning, giving, and sharing. You know what I'm saying? These things are not being practiced as a culture. We're not doing that. Like, we might do it once a year at Thanksgiving, which is coming up, by the way, or Christmas, when we're giving. The spirit of giving is supposed to be in the holidays, right? But as a year-round daily practice and mindset, I think we're far afield from making that happen on a regular basis as a culture and as a society.
Yeah, no, I'm right with you. And they're not working together anymore. Like, it's absolutely okay for a business to make money.
Yes.
But part of contributing to society is giving with what you have. And so if you'll indulge me, I have a quick little thought or story about this one. So
Sure.
I fly Delta a lot. It just seems to go to the places that I want to go. And I noticed that in the jet bridge, the terminal, not the terminal, the jet bridge, when you're going on a Delta flight, in most of them, there's various ads. And I'm just like this for all airlines, but one of them specifically is for their giving back. And I've happened to have done some international work with an organization called Habitat for Humanity. If anyone's interested in going overseas, I'm hoping they open up this program again so you can go.
Yes, my dad worked with them helping teach kids how to build homes.
That's so cool. We got to talk about
it was very very good.
I've had tremendous experiences, so much so that I started leading trips, and we haven't gone in years now because of the pandemic. But anyway, that's a shameless plug for Habitat for Humanity. But I don't know Delta very well, other than, I know their planes and I fly them, and I have my Sky Miles number. But it seems to me that ad is very kind of typical for a lot of large organizations, that they check the box of generosity. Like, hey, we give money to Habitat for Humanity, or, we send our employees occasionally on these trips. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff. I think that's good. Those are good places in the world. But what's the reason why these organizations are doing it? And so my teaching or my thought or the things that I like to share are all about how you need to make sure that the people in your organization or the people in your family, or that the reason behind the giving and the generosity is truly there. And that it's not just kind of like you were alluding to before, that it's not just this thing that you have to do or this obligation. It's something that should be part of the culture. And I worry that in today's society, that because we're over specializing and everything fit into his little box because there's so much information, that it has become this thing that there's no culture around it. It's just an item or just an event. And I always say this: generosity is not an event; it's a mindset, and there's a completely different shift there.
Yeah, I was on driving in the car with my dad recently on a trip to go actually get my computer fixed. He was asking me questions about, we were talking about fear, we were talking about motivational speaking, about consulting for corporations and companies and organizations, about fear. Specifically, like, he was asking, how does this work into companies and what they're doing? Like, why do they need this? And I said, well, it's interesting that you asked this, because we've turned a corner. Back 15 years ago, companies were checking the box, meaning, in order to appear that they were good to society, in order to appear that they were participating in the community, in order to appear on all of these things, they could check these little boxes by putting out promotional ads that said, we do this, we give back, here's our philosophy on X, Y, and Z. Well, today, we, the public, are so much more empowered. We can hold you accountable to that mission and that statement and that strategy and that purpose. If you don't, we will know it. And as consumers, hold you accountable, and we will change the course of your stock value and change the course of our purchasing and buying power if you don't meet our standards for what it means to have an identity and a philosophy and a purpose. And so now companies are hiring people like you, and hopefully me more, to talk about how to develop a cultural, philosophical soul, a soul that has to be multifaceted, right? It can't just be one-sided. It has to be developed and strategic in terms of who are you as a company and how are you developing as a soul, an entity. By the way, you have the ability to be an entity in the eyes of the government. It was written there, says you are an entity. Then how are you impacting society, and how are you developing a socioeconomic, philosophical, and emotional strategy and mission that meets the needs not only of your employees, but of the community at large? And how do you follow through with that, right? You have to be able to identify it and not just check a box. It's much different today, and it's turning a corner. And I'm hoping to see in the next 5 to 10 years, because of what you and I do, what other people that we do, even fellow speakers that we know at the Speaker Lab, that are working with corporations to do this, but also what society does in holding companies, associations, organizations, and corporations accountable to doing better by us, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And, the work that we do, or at least the work that I do, I don't want to speak for you, Michael, but I trust strongly in your mission. But, I'm not a sales trainer. I'm not a leadership coach. I'm not a business consultant. But I tell you what, all of those things will improve if you have a culture of generosity around your organization. And I'm biased because
you can't have a mindset. You can't have a, what is the word? You can't avoid the shift in your mindset if you're operating from a place of generosity. If you're participating, thinking, working, mission-driven as a company from a place of generosity, it's impossible to work against the altruistic nature of that very endeavor.
Exactly. And I'll challenge anyone out there whether you're a leader in an organization or it's your first day in the job.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Fearless Road podcast. I am your host, Michael DeVue. We got a little interruption in our tech and our signals. Bob and I have been, at the beginning of the show, we even mentioned it. I think both of us are a little cursed with this episode, but we are determined to get this finished. When we left off last time, I was mentioning to Bob, we were talking about generosity as a cultural mindset in the workplace, specifically with leadership, and how adopting a mindset or working from that particular philosophy, you couldn't help but improve your organization and the employees in your organization if you're operating from a mindset, a cultural mindset of generosity. And Bob was mentioning that he would challenge anyone out there, whether you're a leader of an organization or whether it's your first day, to stop thinking about generosity as just a singular event. So Bob, will you please take us from that idea that you were, and finish your thought there.
Yes, I believe that generosity is a mindset and not an event. And the greatest leaders, and when I say leaders, I don't mean leader in title. I don't mean necessarily the CEO or the president, although it absolutely applies at that level as well. But it could be just about anyone in an organization. If you approach your work with a mindset of generosity, rather than thinking that generosity is some sort of event or something that's required of you to be part of an organization or required of you to be considered worthy, you're much more likely. In fact, I guaranteed when we were previously recording that you will find your organization being more productive, because what happens is people want to be involved with organizations like that. And it could be a Fortune 500 company. It could be a what I like to call a small impact project in your community. People want to do business and do volunteer work and do just about anything with an organization that makes them feel like they're collaborating for something greater than themselves.
And I 100% agree with you, of course. I think I mentioned to you before, I was talking to my dad on a road trip recently. He was asking me about these things. He was specifically asking me about my guests, but people that I talk to, and it's like, what do they tell executives? And what are they, when they do these speeches and stuff, what are they sharing? And I said, well, it's interesting because we are now entering a time and an era when organizations are now beginning to develop a heart, a mind, and a soul. And it has to be congruent. It has to be in alignment with what they're presenting to society, what they're presenting to the community, and what they're presenting to their employees, because we now have the opportunity to hold them accountable to who they are as an entity and how they serve not just us, the employee, or the widget makers and the widget suppliers, but how they serve the community at large. And if they are not in alignment with who they claim to be, employees will feel that dissatisfaction, and they'll leave and go someplace where they feel that it's in alignment with who they are and what their beliefs and what their philosophies are.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that as well. And the word that stuck out to me when you just mentioned that was disingenuous. And I've maybe to a fault when I was younger, I was the eternal optimist. I always believed people what they said, but I've learned over the years that there's so many messages and so many definitions of success out there in the world that a lot of people are trying to achieve something that they may not even truly understand. And there may not be true malintent, but they display something because they feel that they have to, and they're not doing it for the right reasons. And so that's exactly what you're talking about. Organizations that truly want to be generous and have a generous culture are the ones that will actually be that way and attract the people. You can put up a front and a facade all you want on social media and say things, but once you hire someone and they are working in your culture, they know immediately if that's truly what should be. And I got in a discussion the other day with someone about the word authenticity, and I feel like it's thrown around a lot out there. We need to show up as our authentic
absolutely selves. It is. It's like a buzzword that just has been used and abused everywhere.
Yeah. And in this case, though, organizations that are authentically, like truly authentic with their culture are the ones that are going to attract the right people. And you know immediately, especially for employees. And I also personally believe, you talk about your dad asking you what people tell organizations. I tell them all the time that a generous culture attracts the top talent and the most loyal customers, but especially the talent, especially the people that are working for your organization. They will know immediately if your generosity is authentic.
And it occurs to me, I was listening to NPR the other night, and there was an episode talking about security. Security in America, there's a couple of companies that are some of the biggest, largest personal and private security companies. And that actually there's one that employs over 300,000 Americans, and they're just third or fourth in size to Walmart. And they had callers and people talking about the reason why they were having so many issues with local security, so many shootings, so many bad apples, if you will. And the security organization had said, well, we have a hard time keeping good employees, and we have a hard, we can't seem to keep good staff, and they change out a lot, so we can't get them trained. And they were passing on the responsibility for doing good service and good work and good training to the fact that they couldn't keep good employees. And I'm like, you literally admitted that you have a culture where your employees, A, don't respect you, there is no philosophy that they're adhering to, and they're not doing good work, and they're not sticking around. That's a you problem. That's not a public problem. That's not an employee problem. That's not a staffing issue. That's an internal issue with the alignment, your misalignment with your philosophy and what you are delivering to your employees. If you had and ran a good company that paid them well and what they were worth, a living wage, if you trained them well and respected them as individuals, if you treated them and the society that they serve equally, right, with the same intention and the same altruistic, like you say, generosity and respect, then you wouldn't have employees, A, not in alignment with what your services and policies are, B, leaving you regularly, and C, not performing up to expectations. So, and I'm assuming that's what you bring when you do this training and this coaching and stuff for executive leadership and stuff in your workshops with them. It's not just about where to invest your money to be generous and have a legacy. It's really a philosophical shift in the mindset and practice, right?
100%. And I love how you talk about, it's not just giving your money, because that's a portion of it. And I will point this out too, because there's probably a lot of people out there that might be listening and thinking, well, are you telling me not to, give of our finances and not to donate to organizations? I'm not saying that at all. In fact, what I'm saying is, if the foundation of your organization is well-defined, whatever that is, however you want to express yourself, whatever you think is generous, what's altruistic is the word that you just used, Michael. But not only will that help you be a better business, but it will also help make it easier to get people to participate, for people in your organization to donate money, all those other things that we think of as chores, that, like we talked about, maybe doing it to check the box of generosity, to make it, to give your organization the right brand. They become suddenly much more natural and simpler to get people to participate in, because it's part of the foundation. They're not coming to work saying, all right, I got to get this project done or else we're going to get fired, or we got to hit our budget deadline. And then, oh yeah, the other thing that I have to do when I'm done with that is now I got to go volunteer, or now I got to go, do some other project. It's not like that at all. In fact, it's all part of it, and it's actually enjoyable. And that's why people want to be part of your organization.
Well, and I think you also are pointing to the fact that once you begin the process of adopting a generous mindset and a generous culture, right? Once you begin to define what that looks like for your organization as a leader, it impacts your HR department, which means it impacts your hiring, which means you redefine how you hire, who you hire, what you hire for, right? The entire framework of your organization and how people work for you and why they come to work for you now gets redefined, because you can't just put it on a piece of paper and add it to your mission statement as a footnote and then not execute. If you're going to execute, it means it's coming down, it's trickling down, it's affecting every department, the way that it's defined, how you do the work you do, how you impact the community and your employees. And I think I'm hopeful that we're seeing a bit more of that in our organizations, and I'm glad that you're doing that work with them. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us or you're coming into the tail end of it, we're with Bob DePasquale, the generosity guy who teaches and trains and coaches and mentors organizations, leaders, and executives on how to adopt a generous mindset and a generous culture that impacts the philosophy and execution of your entire organization from the top all the way down to the street and all the way to the shelf if you deliver goods and services. So pick up the book, make sure that you get on board with him or hire him for your organization, because it really can create some impactful change. In addition to that, in your September 5th blog, you wrote that purpose is not a revelation, it's a practice. And you said that the idea of finding one's purpose often leads to frustration and endless searching. People tend to expect a sudden epiphany or a life-altering revelation that will uncover their true calling. While these moments can happen, they are rare. Waiting for such an epiphany can be a passive and disheartening experience. I love that you say finding your purpose is a practice and not just a revelation. I know a bunch of us have discovered and been like, oh my God, this is my purpose. I need to start doing this. But once you do, you need to create a practice around loving, embracing, and making that purpose a part of your life. Number one. Number two, for those of us, these are two pointed questions. One, I'd like you to comment a little bit about this statement: purpose is not a revelation, but a practice. And two, for those of us who are younger and haven't really found our purpose yet, and we're still sort of in search of it, how do we practice the art of that purpose when we really don't know what it is? And how can that get us to finding it on our way?
Well, my response or commentary on the blog article that you're mentioning is that came to me. I remember writing that, or, pushing through my thoughts. And I say pushing because, you ever been in one of those situations where you have some really heavy thoughts and you're trying to sift your way through what you're even thinking. So it came out because I had just experienced a couple different things, big changes in my life. I was thinking about what the meaning, why did those things happen? And it made me realize that we're not in control of all of the things that happen in our life. There's thousands, millions of external forces outside of us that we're not in control of. And so a lot of times those external forces can contribute to some kind of epiphany moment, like you mentioned, or that I mentioned in the blog article. And so it can be easy. I think the human mind is designed to take shortcuts so we can simplify and be more efficient. And so it can be easy to assume that all of these external forces have come together to form something that was actually your thought process or something that defines your reason for doing something. It can be a good reason to try and take on an opportunity, but it's not going to give you your life's purpose. I say purpose is a journey or a practice because it takes time for you to understand what's most meaningful to you. You don't try something for the first time and realize it's your purpose. You might realize you love it. And there's a lot of things that I do, Michael. I have plenty of hobbies in my life. I love all of them, but none of them are my life's purpose. My life's purpose is to help organizations build generous cultures. But it took me a long time to figure that out.
Yes.
And so to answer your second question, if you are the type of person, whether you're young in age or young in this journey of purpose, the first thing that I always tell people to do is when they're considering this is think about the things that they've spent the most time in their life on. And if you'd be I think you'd be surprised at a lot of what you write down. I always recommend you write it down. Think about the places and times and things that you've done the most in your life and consider those first, because I think a lot of us are a lot closer to finding purpose than we actually think than we actually believe. We're looking, going back to external forces, we're looking at other things that people are doing in the world and what's being promoted and what the world tells us is great. And we're starting to think, okay, I have to walk in that direction, when maybe you've already been walking in the right direction. So that was the first suggestion. And then the second thing, or other things that you start going on beyond that, is take opportunities, try new things. If you're still struggling, you got to look, and that's why it's a practice. So the practice is not a perfectly designed habit that you do for a half hour every day. The practice is actually trying new things and stepping out of your comfort zone.
And I would add to this, like I'm like you, there's a lot of things that I loved to do and have loved to do and have done because I like them or love them, or I'm just good at it. But they're not necessarily my purpose. And I think I would add, in addition to discovering or taking a look at the things that you gravitate towards and do easily and do well, during those times, can you name the moments when you feel 100% authentically yourself, and 2, you feel recognized, acknowledged, or appreciated in those moments for being 100% authentically yourself? If those two things happen simultaneously while doing something that you enjoy and you love, that actually might be your purpose. You might be able to make that into it, because you can do a lot of things you enjoy, but you may not feel 100% authentic there. You may not feel joy and happiness while doing it every single time. But if you can see how many times those align, I think that will pinpoint, connect those dots. For me, when I looked back at it last year and was looking at what had come up, was everyone was asking me, was like, you land on your feet. Fear is not a thing for you. You always seem to approach fear differently than everybody else. You seem to overcome it or be fearless in everything that you approach. And I just thought that this was lip service. I thought this was people being nice to me, families being encouraging, like you said, land on your own two, you land on your 2 feet or whatever, and when I looked back, I realized I did have a different relationship with fear. I was approaching those moments and those challenges and those tragic changes and impacts in my life very differently than a lot of people were. And I began to look at and examine why. Then I began to look at, okay, of all the things I've done in my life, right, which moments did I feel the happiest and the most joy while doing those things? And does that align with the way that I treat fear? And it occurred to me that using my skill set in entertainment and broadcast and interviewing people and talking to people about fear became the thing for me. Like, I want to examine this. I want to take a bigger, deeper look at my life and at fear. But I like the ability to be able to use all of these skill sets to produce a show where I get to talk to people about their fears. I get to talk to them about their journeys. And that felt more in alignment with my purpose. And so this now is my practice. And you'd mentioned before too, I think it was, are you living it with intention, right? Not just accidentally doing some of the things that come next, or just doing the next thing in front of you simply because it's the next thing to do, or you just happen to be good at it, or someone said, hey, you could do X, Y, and Z. I realized I wasn't actively working and living and doing those things with intention. I was just doing them because these were what came naturally to me, but they weren't providing joy for me, and they weren't providing good service, I think, at the other side for those individuals I was giving them to. I think it could have been better if I was living with that intention and that practicing that purpose.
I think the human body and mind are amazing. They can sprint in, short spurts, and I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but I mean, something that's not truly your purpose or joyful, you can do really well, and you could support with people. You can even work in the field and do some really good work. But for sustained excellence, not perfection, but for sustained excellence and joy and fulfillment, I think it's key that you find that purpose. And that's why I mentioned in the blog that it's a journey and not a specific epiphany. It's just impossible. I've never experienced it that way. Anyone who's had some epiphany and then suddenly it changes their whole life and it's their complete purpose. In fact, I challenge people on that all the time. When I see this a lot on social media. I see people say stuff like, oh, my life was down in the dumps and I was doing terrible and, I couldn't pay my bills and everything was terrible. And then I heard this quote and now I'm an online entrepreneur, making $100,000 a week selling trinkets. And I always ask them, I said, I'm not saying you're not selling trinkets for $100,000 a week, but what was that moment that completely changed your life, and describe it? And very rarely do I get a good answer. And I hate to criticize people, but it doesn't work like that. To me, it takes time. You don't see the grind that it is until you recognize the result.
Well, and this is a great way to wrap some of this stuff up. We are on a journey, ladies and gentlemen. You're on a journey. You're on your own fearless road. And if you want to maintain excellence and in generosity, Bob DePasquale is your guy. He can bring the mindset, the culture, the shift, the change, the questions that you need to ask in order to bring a generous mindset and a generous culture and an idea of excellence, a consistency and excellence in performance and finding your purpose. I encourage you to get out there, get his book, Personal Finance in a Public World. I encourage you to listen to his podcast or read his blog. We've given a lot of tips and tricks and things here over this, trying to get this episode out. But as we wrap this up, are there any other things you'd like to leave the listeners with? Some, parting message or a final thought?
My final thought is this. I'll share a quote that I love, and I heard it once. I've heard it multiple times now, but I heard it the first time, I think it was at a concert. I was a teenager, and the lead singer said, "You may not change the world, but you may change the world for one." And I've always remembered that, and I wasn't always working in the generosity space as I am now, but I'm more and more realizing how relevant that quote is in the work that I do today. So if you're someone out there, you're a leader in your organization, remember, regardless of the title, you're a leader, and you may not change the world, but you may change the world for one person that you encounter today.
And that's true. I think we have to remember that the impact of what we do might just reach that one individual who needs it in that moment. As I've said before, there are no new words, but there are always new ears to hear. And what you hear here on the Fearless Road podcast, as well as on Bob's podcast, is new and could be impactful and could change your life and change the direction that you are headed in. And I think it's meaningful. So where can we find you, Bob, other than, just give us a little feedback. I know that there's your website and your podcast and your blog. Where can people get a hold of you?
Well, the website is bobdepasquale.com. All of my socials are on there. At BDePa, you can check me out. And then if you have financial questions, initiateimpact.com is our company. And I would love
Initiate Impact. Okay.
DMs are always open on social, so hit me up and would love to talk about how generous your day is.
Yeah, and I will put the links, of course, on the YouTube at the end of and the copy of the blog and the transcript, and of course on all my social media and stuff that's going out to promote this episode. You will see it on there. This episode should be coming out this holiday season as we look at generosity and we think about being grateful and being generous to those of us around us, and we can make an impact and change the world. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us yet again. Sticking with us as Bob and I get this episode done. Bob DePasquale, the finance and generosity guy. Thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate you taking the time really to make this happen for both of us. And I wish you the best going into the Thanksgiving holidays for you and your family. Everybody, stay fearless, be well, be kind to each other, and be generous. Don't forget. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.